Hi, John. How you doing?
Good, Joe. How are you today?
Hey, good, thanks. Good. I think we met on LinkedIn for I think about over a year ago or something like that. We kind of interacted on and off, and wanted to bring you onto the Data Nerd Herd today to talk about your book, Building Analytics Teams, Harnessing Analytics and Artificial Intelligence for Business Improvement. Now, this is kind of an interesting intro story. I came across this book in part because you've been publicizing it, but also I was going to start writing an article on data teams. And then I picked up your book and then realized you kind of said everything I needed to say. And so I didn't end up writing the article. And I thought instead we'd just have you on so you can talk about your book. So
Thank
congratulations.
you. I appreciate it.
Of course. For those who don't know you, you want to give a brief introduction of who you are and what you're about?
Sure, absolutely. I've been in the information management, business intelligence, data warehousing, advanced analytics field for 37 years now. I got out of college. I graduated in the early 80s. I got a degree in computer science, and I went to work for some large corporations and was doing some pretty standard IT development stuff. Shortly thereafter, like 2 or 3 years into my career, I just realized that everything was going to be centered around data and what has now become advanced analytics. So I started moving in that direction, decades ago.
Nice.
I remember running into people along the way, and they're like, "Why are you always focused on data? Why are you always talking about analysis? Why is this so interesting to you?" And I said, "I think that's the way the whole world's going to go." So eventually we got there. So it's been a focus of mine.
Yeah, I mean, how long did it take for the world to catch up with you?
I'd say probably 25 years.
Okay. So, a bit. I mean, walk me through that though. I mean, what were some of the things you had seen along the way that it kind of caused you to hard or maybe been a bit frustrated?
Well, it was always one of those things that I knew it was going to be a long haul.
Mhm.
And 25 years kind of I was being facetious there, but there's always been areas of focus. When I started out, it's hard to remember way back then, but there was only one company that had two companies that had a relational database. Oracle didn't even exist at that point. So relational databases were a combination of proprietary hardware and software because they were so specialized and unique. Most people didn't even understand how they worked. I was one
Mhm.
of the first few people to learn SQL as a skill set, and then it just made sense to me that we were going to take data from all sorts of systems and integrate it together, and then use it for insight. And back in the days, it used to be business intelligence and graphs and reports, and then we moved on into the early phases of data mining, and now we've moved into advanced analytics. So uh, I would actually, now that I think about it a little bit more, I would say I was never really frustrated or upset with it or anything like that. I always knew that there was more to be done. The state of the
Right.
art was always going forward, which has made it a really exciting career.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, I'm sure you've seen a lot too along the way, and it's pretty cool that the history's finally caught up with where you'd been. And then with respect to analytics teams, I noticed in the book that you kind of uh, you don't necessarily call them analytics teams per se, but more like advanced analytics teams. What is an advanced analytics team as opposed to an analytics team?
It's interesting. I do make that distinction, and I'm glad that you caught that and called it out. I'm in meetings all the time with people, and they say, "Well, I'd like to just call it analytics." And I said, "Okay, well, just tell me what you think analytics is." And most of them cite business intelligence. It's a report, or it's a dashboard, or it's a summation of different things, or it's a trend. And in my mind, that's not an analytic. That's just reporting. That's historical reporting. In my opinion, if you look at Gartner's taxonomy, Gartner's analytical maturity model, Forrester's, any of them really, it always starts out from information, then it goes to reporting and dashboarding, then it goes into descriptive statistics, and then into predictive and prescriptive and simulation and optimization. My opinion, the things that I talk about, advanced analytics, always start at descriptive statistics and go forward in that model. So predictive analytics, prescriptive analytics, simulation, and optimization. Those are the things that I'm talking about. I generally don't include business intelligence, and it's not a knock on BI. I mean, I worked in BI for decades. It's just that's not advanced analytics, in my opinion.
Right. Tend to agree with that definition. So one of the things that I get asked a lot, and I think you could shed some light on, is a head of data at a company. Maybe a company is looking at doing advanced analytics. They want to hire somebody who can oversee this role. Walk me through things that a company should be looking for in terms of this person who's going to oversee advanced analytics, as well as who that person should report to.
Yeah, it's we have this conversation a lot. I'm sure you do. I do. It comes in different forms and flavors. My view on it is if you're going to have someone who oversee advanced analytics, they should have some understanding of math is a basic. It's not that they need to be an expert in neural networks or boosted trees or any of those kind of techniques, but they do need to understand the underpinning of the math. They do need to understand data. They don't have to be the best in the world at those kind of things, but they also need to have leadership capabilities, and they need to have excellent communication skills and communication all the way around, communication up to executive levels, communication down to data science and technical levels, across to their peers in finance and supply chain and marketing and IT and those kind of things. So you're really looking for a leader who is well versed, someone who's, they always say the best data scientists are good coders, but great mathematicians. Or some people say that they're good mathematicians, but great coders. You hear people go at that equation both ways. So the leaders in these areas they intersect a lot of different areas of communication and technical skills and vision, process, different things in those areas. So lots comes together in many different intersections. Where these people report into is important. If you have a chief analytics officer, let's just say that because it's a title people like to use right now, you generally want them to report into the chief operating officer, or hopefully even better yet, into the CEO. And people say, well, why? Couldn't they report into the CIO, or couldn't they report into the CFO? Well, you certainly can have them report into anywhere in an org structure. That's definitely a possibility. But what you see all the time is if they report into the CFO, then cost constraints, reporting deadlines, the fiscal cycle, the focus of the CFO is running on the business from a financial perspective, and that's usually where the analytics people end up working. If they end up working in the organization of the CIO has a very specific mindset. It's around vendor managed relationships. It's around cost cutting. It's around outsourcing. Generally you're not going to get, the chief analytics officer having great sway in the organization if they're underneath these two sub functions in the organization. You really want that person to carry the weight of the CFO or CEO with them when they go to the head of supply chain and say, hey, we're going to come in and do an analysis of the efficiency of the supply chain, and then we're going to reorganize the supply chain when we're done. And if you're coming from the CIO, I bet you that is not going to happen.
What about reporting to a CTO? We see that a lot too.
You can do that. Yeah, you can do that. But generally then you have the same kind of concern then. You end up with a technology focus rather than a business focus. And I talk a lot, as you know, in the book, that if you're doing an analytics project, you usually need to be married with a subject matter expert from the functional area. So CTOs are great. I like CTOs. And I've certainly had conversations with large corporations where the CIO has been a visionary and had great political and social influence in the company, and it can work. I'm not saying blanket statement that it won't work if that's the way it is. But generally, if you did a survey and you went out and saw, CAOs reporting into these line of business functions, their impact would be less.
Mm-hmm. Makes a lot of sense. So one thing you hit on a lot too is data literacy and the need for that across organizations. If a company has a low data literacy, how would that company raise the bar on its data literacy?
It's a good point. How do you do it? You end up bringing in people that understand the value of data. or you teach the digital natives or the people coming into the organization the value of data, because it's one of those things that if the data literacy is low, you can be effective, but you do spend a lot of your time teaching people why you would want to use data and why it's important to bring together information. One of the byproducts of having low data literacy is that you'll have conversations and people will say, well, we have all the information we need in our systems, in SAP or Siebel or wherever it happens to be. And you say, well, there's great information to be able to benchmark against the competition or to learn about what's going on in the market or new customers or new patients or new donors. And generally that has a price tag. So it's hard to get people to understand the value of buying third-party data and then integrating it in and using it in conjunction with internal data. It can work with low data literacy. It just takes longer and costs more. That's all.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. So, I mean, this kind of brings up a point that I know I see quite a bit, which is there's this pull between like technology, processes, and then team. I guess some people see these as sort of distinct areas, really, where we can maybe solve things with technology versus getting the right people or the right processes. What are your thoughts around that? Any observations you've had?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. And until I had my most recent experiences at work, I probably would have had a hard time answering the question. But I've run into some people in the last couple of years who are, I'm admittedly a tech and data nerd. So that's just where I live my life. And I see everything through the lens of data and analytics. And I met some people that were process oriented, really process oriented. And they see everything through the lens of a process, which is fine. There are many processes in the world and process reengineering has a place in the world. But in my mind, when you have people, technology, and process all coming together, then that's when real interesting things can happen. Almost magic can happen at that point. So when you find people who are usually off on one end of the spectrum, everything's a process or everything's a data point or everything's an analytic or everything can be solved by, having amazing, Herculean people around. They can work and they can make a difference, but they're not going to be as impactful if you could marry the three of them together.
Makes a lot of sense. And I guess as if you're the head of data, how would you go about reconciling those different schools of thought? Say maybe the team you inherited, or maybe the team you built has a few components where there might be a bit lopsided.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the way I've done it is the people aspect of it. Of course, I'm always happy to have rock stars on my team, people who are 10 times, 100 times better than anyone else. But I tend to think that, we end up hiring the people more in the middle of the bell curve than over on the ends, just because it's a function of numbers and, that's the way it works in general. And I also think of the people as I like to value people over a long period of time, and I like to be consistent with them. So I try not to drive my team to try to do Herculean efforts and work in these massively pressurized environments. I just don't find that to be productive. So I like to have people more consistent long term. And so I keep that as a constant. And then with the process folks, I try to bring them in and explain the data side of it. And then the data side, I try to bring them along and have them understand the process perspective of it. So generally, if we can do our job and do it well, we can get data, we can do our exploratory data analysis, we can do our modeling, then we can come back to the process people and say, hey, we've proven this is a new and better way to do it. Is there some way that you can do process reengineering that brings these innovations into play? And that works out pretty well. I have also found, and this is a broad generalization, of course, is that the process people are very concrete. If you go to them before and you say, hey, we're going to analyze this phenomena and we're going to try to come up with this innovation, generally their response is going to be, that's never going to work and we're not going to listen to it. And we can a 12-step process to a 7-step process. and we're going to do that, and don't bother us with this, possibility of getting something done. So generally, if you go do the analytics and you show them the improvement, then they can understand what you're talking about.
That makes a lot of sense. In your book, you talk about sort of the notions of an artisanal team and a factory team. Can you walk through that real quick? Like, what's the difference, especially as you're maybe thinking about how to construct a data team?
Yeah, absolutely. I really, have thought about this a lot, obviously, and I've built a number of teams, and I really like the artisanal or artisanal approach to it. And that's where, they're on two ends of the spectrum, really, is the way I think about it. On the artisan side of it, if you have a team made up of artisans, they're expected to do everything, all the way from problem statement definition to data acquisition engineering, feature engineering, modeling, subject matter expert engagement, executive engagement, everything. So you have generally a smaller group of people that are engaged in the entire spectrum of a project. Now, the modular, approach on the other side of the spectrum is that, you have 2 people in data acquisition, 2 people in data integration, a couple people in feature engineering, and they're running the data and the problem through that modular or through that factory approach, and out the other end comes, the results. And people generally, the first thing they say is, oh, well, you're going to have more people over here. Yes, you are going to have more people on the modular side than the artisanal side, but these people are more expensive than these people. So you may have more people and less people, but the cost differential on their salaries and their benefits pretty much comes out that if you were looking at it on a throughput basis, the teams basically cost the same. So then people say, well, if they cost the same, then wouldn't you always want to have an artisanal team? And the answer is not really, because company culture makes a big difference too. If you don't have a culture where people are used to seeing artisans running around and doing everything and being the center of that attention, that can be problematic in an organization. If they tend to break things down into a modular approach and everybody does what they're asked to do and they do it well and it moves through and that works, then the culture of the organization might drive you to have a modular approach. Then people say, oh, okay, well, those are the only 2 options I have. No, not really. Right now, what I'm doing at work is I have a team of artisans, and then I'm actually setting up a modular team that's actually going to do all the early stage data acquisition, data integration. They're going to build finalized objects, and those objects are going to be fed up to the artisans who's going to do the modeling. So you're going to have a hybrid team. So it really depends on how you want to do it in your organization.
Mm-hmm. That's an interesting point. Are you familiar with Conway's Law?
What was that again?
Are you familiar with Conway's Law? Basically,
No.
the notion that companies will build systems that reflect the way they communicate. And so if you have like a really siloed company, it's going to have really siloed.
It's basically it.
Yeah. It reminds me a lot of that. That's interesting. And this brings up a point that I know I see quite a bit when you're dealing with maybe, I would hate to call it legacy, it's kind of a derogatory term, but an older company. What are some ways that they can think about building their data teams too? Because I can't imagine it's the same way that you would build a data team at Facebook or a modern tech company.
Yeah. We've done this at CSL. CSL is a $10 billion biopharmaceutical company that's been around for 100 years. So you can't get much more legacy than that. And so my approach has been to kind of take the data science team and set it off to the side. And we have our own data environments. We have our own tool sets. We have all that kind of stuff. So we can work on exploring things in a way that doesn't get bogged down by the rules and regulations and the processes of, the larger corporation. Now, when we build systems that have to go into production and are used for, corporate decision making, we have to follow all the rules and the governance and all those kind of things like everybody else. But when someone comes to us and says, hey, we think we can do a better job on helping our patients in this area or attracting donors in this way, we have our own environments that we can spin up quickly, we can move fast, and then we can go back to them and say, you're right. Your theory actually checks out. And that's something that we might want to build into production systems. Or we can go back and go, well, you were close, or maybe that doesn't work at all. So we've kind of set up, a SWAT team off to the side is what we've done.
As you start gaining more success in maybe these kind of older companies, one thing you bring up in the book is dealing with middle managers and incumbent processes. I like this quote in your book. Do not underestimate the lack of awareness in existing middle managers of the need for changes in processes, training, job content, and performance management to fully leverage and utilize data and analytics. That really hit home to me because it's something that I've seen over and over, where even if you have the blessing of a CEO at the top and even at director level, it always inevitably seemed like the people who were sort of in the squishy layer where that was sort of the morass you had to, that was where the hard work started. Do you want to speak more on the point that you made about middle management in the book?
Yeah. As you said, I've run into that squishy layer and been bounced back many times. And I talk about a fair amount in the book that you need to, as an analytics leader, you need to start communicating from the top all the way down. The people that are going to be affected by those changes. We've seen it over and over and over again where we've done some really intriguing work that has been very impactful, and you get it down to that first line manager, that middle manager, a second line manager, whatever it happens to be. And they say, well, no, we're not changing. This is the way it is. And they have the power over that area. And they say, no, it doesn't matter. It's not big enough. It's not an interesting enough change for me, or I'm retiring in 3 years. And after, I'm gone, you can do whatever you want. But while I'm here, you're not doing anything. So it's a communication and a change management challenge is what it is. So, even like you said, if you've got the CEO on your side, you still not over the hump. You can, of course, use name recognition and use that cudgel to, try to beat them into submission, but it generally doesn't work. So it's usually, sit down with them, explain to them. And in most cases, not all cases, most cases, it comes into what's in it for me. That's what they want to know. Right. Why am I going to undertake this change? Why am I going to work with you? Yes, I can see it on the piece of paper that you're telling me that it's going to be better, but that's a lot of work for me to re-engineer my processes. And it may change the content of, the work that my employees have. Why would I do that? So you just have to explain to them, yes, you have all the backing from the senior management, and the company spent all this money to get here. But it's going to benefit you to come along on the journey.
And what are some ways of creating incentives for people to I guess, play along?
It always comes, like I said, it always comes down to what's in it for them. Mm-hmm. Is it a promotion? Is it a raise? Is it the personal kudos that they seek? It's you have to put yourself in their shoes, be empathetic, and if it's they just are change averse, then it's time for you to be a counselor.
Right.
Yeah. Help you get past that.
Yeah, I know. In my experience, when it comes to the change management piece with data and technology, it inevitably comes back to the people and organization. I think I wouldn't say 90% of the time; it's like 100% of the time. Well, it seems to be the case. I'm not sure what your
it's a high percentage
is, but yeah,
it's hard. Yeah, it's hard to put your finger on a specific number, but it's a lot. That's for sure. Mm-hmm. It's the majority. We can say that with high confidence.
Now, over the last decade, we've seen the rise of data science, machine learning, AI, really captivating the minds of C-levels, especially. In your experience, what are some ways that companies can leverage these technologies and really gain benefit from them?
It's great that the C-levels have been captivated by the promise of machine learning and artificial intelligence. That's fantastic for folks like us. We don't have to fight that battle anymore. You go in the past and say, hey, I need, I don't know, $200,000, $300,000, $1 million, whatever it is to do this. And they'd say, well, I think I'm going to put in Workday instead. And you just go banging your head against the wall and go, you got to be kidding me. But yeah, it's what people knew. That's what they understood. So now, you don't have to fight that battle. They're actually coming around and going, hey, why don't we use AI? Why don't we have digital twins? Why can't we predict when things are going to fall over? So then, you got that backing from them. Then really what you need to do is if you can keep their attention long enough, the attention spans are pretty short at those levels, get them to talk a little bit about what the strategic problems are that they see. Is it maintenance in a plant? Is it the supply chain? Is it pricing problems? Is it competitive pressures? And usually those people are pretty clear on where they're, getting pressure from the board or from the public markets or whatever. And that's one thing that analytics leaders have not been very good at, and we need to be much, much better at, is that if you sit down with a CEO or some other C-level executive, they're generally going to tell you in the first 30 seconds what the problem is. And they'll say, yeah, the supply chain is a mess. All right, well, then don't walk away from that conversation and say, well, I need 2 hours with you to understand exactly why the supply chain's a mess. They told you what the problem is. Now go further down in the organization and find the VP of supply chain or operations or the COO and say, hey, I was talking to the CEO and he seems to think that the supply chain's a real problem. And then you can, go talk to many other people and then circle back to that CEO, within the next 3 months and say, yep, I went and talked about it. Yeah, you're right. It looks like we can get, 10 points of efficiency if we do this. Then they're like, great, you listened, you heard what my problem was. Here's the X funding to go do that. And away you go.
Makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I think on the flip side of this too, especially in the universe of like LinkedIn where we both inhabit quite often, there's a lot of interest in machine learning from people looking to join a data team too.
Sure.
I know I'm hit up for advice all the time on how to join a team. I don't know what your advice is for somebody starting out in the data field looking to join a high performing data team. Like, what are some things they should look for?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's I get asked all the time. I'm really surprised. That was not the audience I was expecting to reach when I wrote the book. I'm glad that I reached it, and I'm glad I'm interacting with that part of our community. They're great young people. There's no doubt about it. But yeah, people come up and say, "Oh, I want to be a data scientist." And my first question to them is, "Do you really want to be a data scientist?" Not being a smart aleck or anything like that, but many people think they want to be a data scientist, but they don't really want to. So what I say is, why don't you try to figure out if you volunteer at a community center or, some other social organization, or if you're involved in some other group, why don't you try to get some of their data and do some analysis on it? Or why don't you go find a Kaggle project that you think is interesting and try to run it? And just you don't have to join a competition, but just find a project and play around with it and see what you think. And, there are a subset of people that will come back and go, ooh, I hate doing that stuff. I'm like, well, that's what a data scientist does. There's a lot of data management and cleaning and integrating and aligning. And if that's not something that you like to do, then you probably wouldn't want to be a data scientist. Then the other conversation that I have with them is there's lots of roles in the data ecosystem, data engineering, data visualization designers, data storytellers. You and I probably hear a lot. We hear a lot about data storytelling on LinkedIn now. And I say, you don't have to be a data scientist. This is not just the data science world. This is a data science ecosystem. That's not a really eloquent way to say it, but there's more roles than one. So I try to explain that. And often people will come back and go, yeah, you know what I really want to be I want to be a data engineer. Cool. Or some people will say, I want to be a data engineer on my way to becoming a data scientist. The other thing that I tell generally the younger people that I'm talking to is that don't try to be an expert in everything. Mm-hmm. We don't hire data scientists on our team that know neural nets and NLP and simulation and optimization. You know why we don't hire those people? Because they don't exist. What we say is, you should find something that you're interested in. Maybe you're interested in neural nets. Maybe you just love linear and logistic regression. Maybe, I don't know, there's something in there that you really dig about the data science world. Be great at that, and then if there's other parts that you're interested in, we can teach you that. So, we say, find what you love, do that, come in, be good at it, and then we can help you grow your skill space. So that's generally the advice I give to the people that are saying, I want to be in the data science ecosystem.
Makes a lot of sense. It's good advice. And then I guess what advice would you have for data teams that are looking to attract great talent to their team?
Oh yeah, that's a really great question, Joe. Given the nature of the data science market right now, it's interesting. It's hot, and in some respects, it's not. Because we've all seen that everybody's looking for someone that fits into this box, this little tiny box that we have. Someone with 15 years of Python. Well, nobody has 15 years of Python. We all know that. But we've seen the ridiculous job descriptions that are out there. So what I say to them is it's a two-way interview. I know that you got to pay the bills and you got to pay the rent and you got to take care of your responsibilities and accountabilities, and you want to be working, but you don't want to be working somewhere where you're going to be miserable. So make sure you ask a lot of questions of the leadership. Make sure you ask a lot of questions of the team. Another thing that people don't really understand is that data science is a team sport. Now, we as data people and analytics professionals are known to be introverted, and we like to work on our own and all those things. And most of that is true for many respects. But the way I've set up my team, my artisanal team, is that it's a team sport. So every week we have a call where everybody talks about their current projects. Every 2 weeks I have a one-on-one meeting with people, and everybody's expected to show their code and do code reviews and be collaborative and help everybody else in their projects. So interview the data scientists, because you are going to be interacting with them. And if you don't like them and you find them to be irritating for some reason, then that's probably not a good team for you. So look for the leadership. Insufferable. You probably don't want to work for them either. If the team is in a group of people that you'd like to sit down and have a lunch with or a dinner with, that's probably not a good thing. And if they're working on things like, if they're focused on manufacturing efficiency or, some other kind of domain area that you have no interest in. I grew up in the Midwest. I live in Chicago. I happen to like manufacturing. It's just because, I grew up in Michigan where everything was manufacturing based. I find manufacturing problems interesting and intriguing to me. But I talk to a lot of young people and they're like, I want to work on, consumer affinity, or I want to work on UI optimization through analytics. Well, then you want to look for a company that the UI is the most important thing that they have, or one of the most important things. So that's generally, the way I coach people on what to look for when they're interviewing for their first or second data science job.
Makes a lot of sense too. And it's incredibly important to pick your job carefully, I think, because I don't know about you, but I've seen quite a bit of bait and switch where a company will say they're doing data science and you get in and it's nothing close to what they described it to being. And so there tends to be a lot of opportunity costs as well. So like you say, it's a two-way interview for sure. So time's precious. It's so precious. That time that you spend at company X, your first job, should be time well spent, hopefully. So it's cool.
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely. And I've had those conversations in my job where I've had people come to me and say, well, you've got this group of analytics people, and we've heard about this robotic process automation stuff. We're going to have them do that too. And my response was no. And they go, what? And I'm like, RPA, process automation, is not advanced analytics. And we've hired data scientists to do advanced analytics. Now, if you could force me to do whatever you want because I work for the company and I have to do what I'm told in the end. But when I ask my data scientists or tell them to do this, in 6 months, they will all quit. And they're like, what? And I said, automation is not analytics. Just because they start with A's doesn't mean that they're the same.
That's awesome pushback. Switching gears, what are some things that you've learned since you've written and published building analytics teams?
It's a great question. And one of the things that I learned, we touched on briefly just a little while ago, is that there are so many people that are in their undergraduate degrees, in their master's degrees right now that are very apprehensive about the job market and what's going to happen with them and to them when they join a data science team. That's what I was talking about earlier. I wrote the book ostensibly for people like you and me, Joe. People that have built data science teams, people that have been given a multi-million-dollar budget and a mandate to, build this organization inside this enterprise class corporation. I didn't write it for people in undergraduate. I didn't write it for graduate students. But these are the people that are coming to me on a daily basis. I get inquiries from Romania, Australia, Japan, Brazil, all over the world. People are saying, "Hey, I'm reading your book, and I don't really understand this. Can you help me?" And I go back and forth with them and talk to them about it. Then the other thing that I learned too is that there's a great hunger in the university system to come and talk to academics about what data science really is. 10 years ago, maybe 12 years ago, I was asked to go back to my undergraduate, alma mater, Ferris State University in the state of Michigan, and talk about analytics and talk to them about what an analytics curriculum would look like. And I did that, and I helped them flesh out the curriculum. And now I'm on the advisory board at the University of Michigan at the AI Research Center. I'm on the advisory board of Oklahoma State University, University of Texas at Austin. And what I've found is that there's a great interest in teaching people how to be better analytics professionals, but there's not a great understanding of how to do it. So there's a real practical need in the marketplace to help people all the way from, I'm on the STEM advisory board of our local high school, and we've gotten some AI classes into the curriculum there. So I would say as early as junior high, we should be teaching people about data and analytics. So one of the things that I've learned is that, there's a great hunger out there from students, from academics, and from academic administrators, but they just really don't know what they don't know. And we as a community really can come together and be very helpful for that next generation.
It's a very interesting point. I think along those lines, any thoughts on how we should be teaching the next generation of business leaders and executives about data?
Absolutely. There's no doubt about it, Joe. And I do talk to people in business schools as well. And we're getting there, but we don't do, as you've pointed out, we don't do a great job in getting down to the nitty gritty. We talk about, you hear people say we're data driven. Oh, okay. Then really, is that what happens when as the systems churn and the insights and the transactions come out and go into, the systems and the insights come out, do you automatically change what you do based on those insights? I would say 90% of the time the answer is no. They say, well, we're data driven. We look at data. Well, that's not being data driven. That's, being aware that you have some data. So I think we need to teach, the business leaders of the future what the ecosystem looks like, what a truly automated ecosystem looks like. And I'm not saying that we abdicate to the machines, it's not Skynet or anything like that, but you can have humans in the loop, you can have humans on the loop, you can, whatever level of human intervention you want in there. But we do need to build systems that take in analytics on an automated and regular basis, and then help us make better decisions or just make those decisions for us. And we're nowhere near that right now.
Right. Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, that's going to be interesting. I look at, because there's a dichotomy, and it brings us back to the notion of data teams, right? So the data team exists within an organization, within a company. And at least for the foreseeable future, I would think that companies will look very similar to how they look now. I don't know that we've had various versions of I think thought experiments, like holacracy was one that came out a few years ago, and I think that died a fiery death pretty quick. Yeah. So it is interesting in this respect, though, because I think a data team is maybe a new addition to a company, where maybe it didn't exist in a formal sense before, right? And so, yeah, I mean, in my opinion, it would be great if the book was just, part of the, management training at schools, because I think, because what I noticed, and I'd like to hear about your thoughts on this, but when a data team is formed at a company, I think it tends to be this semi, I don't say mostly misunderstood, but I say semi or fairly misunderstood entity. Um, and maybe it's just a lack of familiarity, but I'd like your thoughts around that.
Yeah, there's a great deal of misunderstanding or misperceptions, misconceptions around data teams, and I think part of it is the name data. As soon as someone hears data, if they're a CEO or COO, they're like, "Whoop, that's IT. Stuff it under the CIO," and that's just wrong. In the book, as you know, I talk a lot about the analytics team, and I'm always banging on about analytics, advanced analytics. You picked up on it early in our discussion today. That those teams are different. They're creative teams, and I actually say that in the book. We're different, but different in a good way. Managing an advanced analytics team or a data team, whatever you want to call it, is really like managing a group of artists more than it is, managing a group of linear thinking people that are doing system implementations or vendor management. And I do a great deal of explaining of that in the book, that, we need to do justice by these teams by saying and understanding that this creative part of it, this gathering of data, this testing of hypotheses, these, building of models, that is something that doesn't go ABC. It might go ABX, C2. It goes all over the place. But once you get past that creative part, you get into more of a linear implementation phase. But the organization needs to understand that creative fusion, that creative energy, is generally where the next big ideas are going to come from. So, you can't really stuff those people under the finance department, under the IT department, and expect that creativity to blossom. They need some leeway to be able to be creative, to be able to know that they can fail. In our weekly meetings, if someone tries something and it doesn't work, that's the first thing we talk about is, why did you try it? What did you think it would do? And what roadblock did you run into? And often we'll have all sorts of interesting conversations. Like, well, I saw this new augmentation to the, GAN approach to GANs that came out of Google research. So I thought I'd try it. Okay, cool. Well, I'm glad you tried it. Well, it didn't work for, forecasting volume in our plasma centers, but it might work in image recognition. So those kind of conversations where things were tried and they might not have worked out the best are some of the most fruitful.
How do you build that sense of vulnerability and openness with a team?
Yeah, we're very upfront about it. It's okay to make mistakes, and it's okay, to run into roadblocks, and it's okay to fail. And I think in a broader corporate setting, that's not a value or a mindset that we see very often, but we do that pretty openly in our organization. And we will go back to the subject matter experts that are working on the teams, and we'll tell them, hey, we're going to go back and reset and try a different approach because what we tried blew up. And they're like, oh, well, what, they're excited about hearing that stuff too. As long as you're not totally messing the project up, we have to be accountable and responsible and deliver for sure. But, they want to know too, hey, you tried something that could have really been groundbreaking, and maybe it worked, maybe it didn't.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. I mean, it definitely puts the science in data science as well, right? So, I mean, that's interesting. I mean, and how would you relay that to an executive too, who maybe, I hate to pick on legacy companies, but they do have a kind of a stereotype of being rigid and no failure. I mean, how would you fit that sort of ability to fail fast and recognition of failing fast into a company where failure might be perceived as sort of a non-starter?
Generally it works pretty well in this way. This is the way it's worked for me anyway, is that, we've gone in and we've done some projects and we've showed success and made money for people. And then in the end, when we go back and have another conversation, they're like, wow, that went really well, man. From the outside, it was just from A to Z and value realization, and it was great. Can you do that again? And I said, well, let's take a moment and let's take it down another level from A to Z. Let's talk about what actually happened, the sausage making of it all. And I talk about the failures. And they're like, wow, I had no idea that you guys did all that. I'm like, yep, that's the way it works in every time. We go in, we try, we shoot for the moon. We try to get 10x, 100x improvement, but sometimes going at it in that way causes failures. But we plan for that failure. You didn't know it happened, but we did. And we ended up with, instead of 100x, we ended up with 30x. And you were expecting 10x. So we over delivered in your mind, but, it wasn't linear. And they go, oh, okay, I had no idea that's the way it works.
That's awesome. How do you stay on top of the latest trends and technologies in the data field right now?
I read a ton. You've mentioned it earlier. You and I are on LinkedIn all the time. We're posting all sorts of stuff. I read research papers from DeepMind and from Google Research and from Facebook and all the different think tanks that are out there. I read something this morning. I decided against posting it, but it was really in-depth research paper on the understanding of the cognitive and social capabilities of ravens, and that ravens are almost as smart as primates. We've had this theory in the past that since we have these mammalian brains and we understand the structure, that our brains are superior to that of birds, and to most birds we are. But to ravens, they don't have the same structure, but they have almost the same cognitive capabilities as orangutans and apes. So I'm reading stuff like that all the time. Most anything that comes out of DeepMind, I read because they're doing some really cool stuff. One of the things that I'm most interested in right now is probabilistic programming, where they're marrying Bayesian mathematics with neural nets. So it's just one of those things that I read, and probably post 8% of what I read. Because, how many people are going to be interested in the difference between ravens' brains and ape brains? Not too many people, but I am. I'm intrigued by it.
That's cool. Yeah, I'd probably be the one out of the other 5 people who would be interested in it. So. Yeah, when you mentioned that, my brain just started going like, there might be some interesting applications to neural nets for that or machine learning. But yeah, it's interesting. It's a for as new of a field it is, it's old as well, right? You've been in the data field for a long time. I haven't been in there quite as long by virtue that I'm younger, but happens. Okay, literally. But yeah, it is interesting in the sense that I was talking with this gentleman the other day who was an early AI, machine learning programmer, and it's fascinating to see how many ideas are recycled over and over again, really.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on what's next for data science or I guess the data world in general?
Yeah, I think, I've been banging on this for a long time, and I think it's going to actually start to come to fruition is the use of data ensembles. So many people have just been focused on, hey, I've got, the ImageNet or the IMNIST set of letters, or I've got this set of images or whatever it is. Those are nice and those are fine. And you can figure out what an A versus, an 8 versus, this is, and that's okay. That's important. But that the idea that, we don't do anything at CSL because I'm driving it this way, that has, a singular data set in it. We build everything with, we've done this one application where we predict where the next donation site should be for CSL Bearing. And it probably has 30 data sets underneath it, and it's fed by 7 different predictive models. We come at it from so many different ways that, in the end, you triangulate or quadrangulate or whatever you want to say, on these data points, and we come up with really good predictions and really good insights. So I think the data world is now understanding that an ensemble of data, a small ensemble of data in some cases, is much better than a big, huge pile of petabytes of the same thing. I think that's very important. In the analytics world, something that we've been working on, that I've been working on for 20 years now, is model portability. Being able to take models out of different systems and port them out and put them in different places, put them at the edge of IoT networks, put them here, put them there, make them totally and completely portable and away from their development environment. I think that's coming to fruition now. We see more and more of that. And then, of course, there's a lot of people, I think Data Robot will probably make its IPO based on this alone. Model ops and data ops and those kind of things are really coming to be real. It used to be when I was at Dell building the statistic platform and we were talking about model operations and model ops. People were like, what are you talking about? We don't have to do that. I'm like, well, we may have to do it now, but we will in a few years. And that's really coming to the forefront right now.
Mm-hmm. Seems to be. Yeah, I was just doing an interview on a MLOps podcast meetup last week, actually. And I think even a couple of years ago, that might have been a semi-trendy buzzword, and now it's not even a buzzword, it's just a thing. People are doing it for real. Yeah. So yeah, MLOps is, I think next year for sure is like the year of MLOps. This year sort of was, but I don't know, it's my prediction. So
yeah, I agree. And then I think in the near future, we're going to see more translators, I guess is the way that I think of them, being able to take utility platforms. There's a lot of companies out there that have the old, and that's not a nice thing to say, but it is old. I'm old, so I can say it. They have their models built in SAS and Statistica and SPSS and those kind of tools. And I think that, anybody that's your age or younger, they don't want to use those tools. That's an old person's paradigm. But there are millions and millions of those models out there in the world, and those companies have invested a lot of money in them. And I think there's going to be more translation platforms out there that says, okay, I want to take all my SAS models, all 1,500 of them or 2,000 or whatever you've got, and I want to turn them into Python. And you'll be able to do that fairly quickly and easily.
That's a really good point. Yeah, because I know there's a plethora of those types of models out there. Now you mention it. Yeah, that's a good point. Cool. So wrapping up, what are some ways that people can learn more about you and any books you've written? Anything else you want to mention?
Well, I've written the two that are behind me. Analytics, How to Win with Intelligence, that came out in 2017. And then the Building Analytics Teams that you held up earlier, came out in June of this year. I have a contract in my inbox to write version 2 of the first book. So I'm gonna rewrite that book or expand that book is what I'm gonna do. And then I've started on the structure of the third book, which is tentatively called The Future of Data. So I'll probably write that one through next year. I think it's gonna be an interesting, fun book to write. And then of course, LinkedIn. If you're selling franchises, I really don't need any of those, so don't connect with me on that. But if you're in the data world, the analytics community, I want to be part of your network. So connect with me on LinkedIn.
That's awesome. Yeah, and like I said, the Building Analytics Team is a fantastic book. Just trying to pull it up on my Kindle now so everyone can see it. Yeah, I mean, if you're going to build a data team, it's a great book. Or you can buy the hardcover, paperback. Get it though. So it's a good read.
Thanks, Joe. Really
yeah, for sure. Of course. Well, thanks for taking the time to talk, and we'll see you back on LinkedIn. So
it was my pleasure. Really enjoyed being with you, and happy holidays to you and your family.
Happy holidays to you. Thank you.